Hello there, this is Pilgrim. Welcome back to my road trip during which we will be exploring the French southeast. This is day 5 and today we will be visiting Orange. Once again, Orange is more along the line of smaller cities. French Wikipedia of mid-2026 lists a population of just short of 30,000 for the year 2023, which is very comparable to Vienne we visited just the day before. Also, just like Vienne, Orange has some notable sights to offer. There are slightly less from what I can tell, but we won't let that spoil our fun. Orange was one of the places I stayed for 2 nights, as opposed to just the one I usually go for. Now, why would I do that if there's not that much to see? Well, the reason for that is further south and also responsible for me not zooming in any further. It's tomorrow's stop actually, Avignon. It's just about 30 minutes away. Therefore, it will be next on our list. This one will keep us busy, I assure you, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to Orange. It's neither at the Rhone, even if it is not too far from it, nor in a valley, but on a plain instead. As a matter of fact, in 105 BC, so during the late Roman Republic, a battle took place here. The so-called Battle of Arausio, as Orange used to be called back then, apparently took place between Orange and the Rhone. 2 Roman armies were decisively beaten by a Cimbri Teutonic force, with this defeat being regarded the worst one Rome ever suffered in terms of losses. But whatever the case, my point simply is that the surrounding terrain has to be flat, for this was basically a requirement for armies of this era to be able to do battle in the first place. There is, however, a hill within city limits. You can easily identify it on here thanks to its vegetation. It is formed like an arrowhead. You probably noticed it already, but the old town is located at the tip of this arrowhead. Let's zoom in to see some more details. There it is. Old Town is very visible now, as are 2 of the major sites Orange has to offer. One of which you will be easily able to identify by now, I am sure. The other being somewhat smaller and therefore far less visible, even if you can still spot it thanks to the road surrounding it. I will give you a second to figure it out, before pointing them out myself. Are you ready? Alright. The larger one is down here. Very clearly a Roman theatre cut into the side of the hill, with the other one being up there and a Roman arch. Our point of entrance, however, will be around here, approaching from the west. Before reaching the Roman theatre, I first had to pass the modern one. There's not much I can give you in the way of information. I'm merely showing it to you so you get an impression of the town. It's always interesting to see what the buildings are made of. I'm talking about the older ones, of course, for it illustrates the local geology very effectively. Yet another reason to look at older buildings is that, even if they are not on your list of sites to visit, they can, in many cases, contain parts of older structures you could find interesting. I mentioned before that Roman ruins tended to be used as quarries after Rome had fallen. But of course there are examples from other periods of time as well. Remember Cluny and how they used parts of its church to build houses? Of course there's also the possibility that older, original parts from a building's founding period were preserved in order to protect them, while all the rest of it was modernized, basically entirely rebuilt, bar mentioned fragment. Whatever is the case, obviously needs to be researched on a case-by-case basis. Moving on, those fragments are our first Roman remains of the day. They used to be part of the Roman Forum, as far as I can recall. Nothing too spectacular, but that is about to change. Now, this is more like it, and just in case you can't recognize it, it's the Roman theatre I told you about. And in case you are wondering why this does not look anything like the ones we encountered thus far, I will get into that later. There's also a field of ruins next to it you can explore in addition. As far as the theatre is concerned, it wasn't open yet, so I decided to walk around it to take a look at its periphery. This is the other side, meaning the opposite side from our direction of approach, and it does look more interesting at this end. However, since it is built into the side of a hill, like it is so often the case with Roman theatres, this was as far as I could go without starting to climb the hill itself, which I wasn't willing to do yet, since I wanted to look at the rest of the town first. But before we do that, here's a short clip showing the entire front side, facing Old Town. Talking about Old Town, City Hall was the first thing I stumbled across marching into this direction. It's a cute one. As you can tell, the sky is pretty grey. That tended to happen in the early morning hours and would always clear up towards noon, which can help you to determine when the pictures in question were taken. Of course, I also went for the main church of the place, which is, once again, both a cathedral and a Notre-Dame. Judging from the entrance, she appears to be a Gothic Renaissance mix. The interior, however, made a different impression on me, making me re-evaluate my initial speculation. While she is in an excellent condition and very well cared for, she does not have a Gothic rib vault, but a barrel vault instead, even if it is a pointed one. What little Gothic elements are present seem to be entirely secondary, making me believe a Romanesque origin was more likely, therefore making it a Romanesque Renaissance mix. Which is, as I learned later, actually something you see in Italy a lot. But I digress. The exterior of the other side, where I could see much more of it, also seems to point to a Romanesque origin, so I'll stick with that for the moment. Leaving the church behind, it didn't take long to reach the second major site Orange has to offer, the Roman Triumphal Arch. Remember the last one we saw all the way back in Besançon on the first day of our trip? Well, this one is way more massive and comes with 3 gates instead of 1. So let's consider it an upgrade, just for fun's sake. There was also an info panel close by, so let's take a look at that first and the arch itself after. Most of the text is in French. There's only a very small English section stating the following. Triumphal Arch, south face, monument to the glory of Rome, built on Via Agrippa at the entrance of the ancient Orange, Colonia Firma Julia Secundanorum Aurosia. The arch depicts the victories of the Roman army at the edges of the empire. Despite most of the rest of the text being in French, there is still a fair deal of information we can get from this, even without translating it. For one, there's a timeline at the top placing the arch, along with the theater and the forum, within the 1st century, therefore making all of these structures at least 100 years younger than the battle I mentioned before. The Notre-Dame is next, 13th century. Now, while it is true that the first Gothic buildings date back all the way to the middle of the 12th century, those were only the very first, which also happened to occur in northern France, not the south. So I'll stick to my Romanesque origins theory, for it seems to make the most sense. After that, only 3 buildings remain. City Hall and what I believe to be the theater we saw initially. Both 19th century and the final one from the 20s we did not come across. I do not know anything about this one, and honestly, I don't care. It wasn't on my list, I can tell you that much. However, the map next to the timeline illustrates the way I took pretty well. It was simple enough as it is. Basically moving in from the west until I hit the theater where I turned north. But back to the arch, for there is something mentioned about it I find most interesting, so I would like to share it with you. See that picture down to the right? Yes, that one. Apparently what happened was that they turned it into a fortress during the Middle Ages. And since that meant they put a lot of weight on top, they also had to reinforce the sides. They only changed it back to the original look later on. But the damage that has been done to the sides, where the supports were placed, can still be seen very clearly. Here it is. And since we are already looking at a genuine article now, let's run with it and try a couple of different angles and close-ups. It is kind of ironic though, isn't it? I always liked the idea of Atlantis, or something along those lines. Yet, despite me trying to look into the matter to the best of my abilities, all I can say is, as far as we know, there has never been anything like that. There are reasons why myths of that sort have proven very resilient, but in the end, they are just that. Myths. Ancient Rome is actually one of the closest things to Atlantis I could find, with this arch being a good example for it. Let me explain what I mean by that. The remains of an ancient, lost civilization, a younger and some might say lesser one, occupies in order to use it for their own gains. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, here's a fun fact for you. There will be more extreme examples of this as we continue our trip. But let's get back to the arch itself again. As far as dimensions go, German Wikipedia of mid-2026 provides us with the following numbers for the structure as it is today. Height 18.6 meters, width 19.56 meters and depth 8.4 meters. Just in case that happens to be a bit too abstract, here's a picture with a person passing by so you get a good idea of the size. As for the motifs, what you can see up there is, in essence, a celebration of Roman victories. Those shields and insignia belonging to defeated armies, while the section above shows a naval battle. while a battle taking place on land is displayed at the very top. There are also some Roman troops on there, but that is basically it. Of course, some of the ornaments have been lost to time, but I doubt they showed anything that would surprise us too much at this point. Erosion is definitely a problem after so much time has passed, although it differs depending on location. While the ceiling of one of the small portals is completely barren, there are still small traces of ornaments left on the other one. It's the ceiling of the large portal which survived best for some reason. As to why, I have no idea, but I can provide you with a shot showing the entire surface. Enjoy. Just as with churches, doves are a problem for Roman ruins too. Any kind of ruin really. Anything that is old and needs to be preserved, consisting of parts that cannot be replaced easily, is under constant threat from them, as they tend to be numerous and able to get anywhere. Naturally, the fact that the stone is rather soft in of itself is not exactly helpful either. Here's a close-up of the material, to give you an idea. It's limestone, at least according to German Wikipedia of mid-2026. It has a very fine, almost grain-like structure. Not nearly as fine as sandstone, but it does look like a material that could be worked with comparative ease. It was at this point when a school class arrived to visit the arch. Luckily, I was already finished by then, so I moved on immediately. The time was 09:46. I headed straight back to the theater, which meant moving somewhat parallel to the way I took getting to the arch. It's always good to cover as much ground as possible, especially in a small town like this, where it is almost impossible to get lost. While I did not find anything that was particularly noteworthy, it was still nice to look at the place. For example, looking into that courtyard, I discovered this house opposite to us. I'd love to know how old of a building it is, for it seemed fairly ancient. Just look at the lower part of the structure. There appears to have been a railing on top of those round arches previously, before the second level was put on, so I suspect that lower part to be older, maybe tremendously, but I never found out. Anyway, before entering the theater, I needed to get a ticket first. They weren't sold at the site, but across the street as I recall. Of course you could purchase souvenirs there as well. I don't remember if that shield was on sale too. I'm certain about that helmet and those swords though. Those you could indeed buy. They would have made for a great gift for one of my giveaways for sure. However, aside from being expensive, I can't walk around with a sword all day, no matter how much I would like to. Last picture in there was of this Roman mosaic. After that I entered the theater. This is me walking in. I even have a short clip for you. Enjoy. Now, back to a subject I mentioned earlier. Why does this Roman theater look so different from all the others we have seen? Like in Vienna, for example. Well, the thing is, the seats for the audience form a semicircle. In all the theaters we have encountered so far, that semicircle faces nothing. Guess what? It is not supposed to be like that. It is supposed to face the stage instead, which was a building, you see? Like this one. But that structure usually does not survive. At least it didn't in Augusta Raurica, Lyon or Vienne. But it did here, in Orange, making this one of the best preserved Roman theaters around. So, we traveled from the largest in Gaul we saw yesterday to the best preserved. And it took us less than 2 hours to do so. I guess I picked a good route. Once you are up there, you have a good view of the surrounding structure and the neighboring field of ruins. Your view of the town is very limited though, thanks to that stage directly in front. The interior is fun to explore as well. For one, there is one, which is not always the case with these. For another, they built it into the rock of the hill, making some of the rooms look like this, which I like a lot. And yes, before you ask, this theater is in use again as well. Apparently, they even have an escape room in there. Now, believe it or not, I'm really bad at riddles, so I never tried any of those. But I would be tempted to try this one. After leaving, I decided to take a closer look at the field of ruins west of the theater, our initial avenue of approach, where I found this info panel. Since it happens to come in 4 languages, I'll read you the English section and show you a close-up of the 2 drawings at the bottom. Digs organized in the auditorium beside the theater have uncovered the foundations of a temple and its altar. This peripteral temple, embellished with 8 columns in the facade, was probably built in the 2nd century AD and dedicated to the worship of the emperor. It opened to the north and ended in an apse to the south. The podium, the foundation of the temple, was not solid, but included several vaulted rooms, above which the cellar, the chamber of deity, was built. The temple rose above a large pavement of stones, which was probably built to mask the vestiges of ancient monuments, leveled in part in the 1st century AD, and whose function remains uncertain. A monumental nymphomeum, a fountain decorated with sculptures and jets of water, or religious edifices. From there on, I went to explore the far side of the theater, climbing the hill in the process. I hoped I would be able to look down inside it, but the view was great towards this direction as well. I suspect this must have been me looking east. Do you see that mountain in the distance? The tip is still covered in snow, yet I am down here working up a sweat. I think the temperature was in the low 20s of degrees Celsius at this point. It's quite normal, of course, but I always found that fascinating. As for the hill we are currently climbing, of course there used to be a fortress on top. With a town this old in front, you have to expect that. However, it has been destroyed. Apparently quite thoroughly. I can't tell you any more than that. It was about this time when I encountered a small problem. The road leading to the top was blocked from here on, due to construction work. I suppose you know me well enough by now to guess what happened next. Of course this was only a small problem, easily circumvented. So I can show you some pictures from the top of the hill at least. Here you go. Looks like the foundation of the fortress. I couldn't get any closer than this though, which should roughly correspond with the direction the theater is located. But since I was unable to get to the edge itself, there was no way I could see it. Too bad. It was a couple of minutes later when I was asked to leave. So I did, effectively ending my exploration of Orange at this point. It was just 11:21 when I took the last picture in town, but I had anticipated this and therefore had other options available. Meaning we might be done with Orange, but we are not done with the day. Now, there were several other locations of interest in the area, and I had already decided for 2 of them. Both fairly close to each other and about an hour away. So, going back to the map one more time, let me show you where they are. Orange is here, Avignon is down there, and we are about to head over there. I won't zoom in any closer on the map. Instead, we are getting started right away. It was a pretty relaxed ride through the French countryside. We are in the Provence now, and vegetation and climate are very Mediterranean. So, just in case you are wondering if we are still in France, we are indeed, but the landscape might very well remind you of Italy, or Spain for that matter. And here we are. The name of this place is Village de Bories. Now, this sure looks quite ancient. One could be forgiven for thinking that these are from the late Stone Age. However, that is widely wrong. Apparently, the oldest buildings of this sort date back no further than the 17th century and were abandoned at the end of the 19th century, making this an affair not too far removed by historical standards. I'll try to summarize what you're looking at in a nutshell. This settlement, along with others of the same type, were erected during a time when new land was given from the king to the people of France to use as farmland. However, said land was not ideally suited to be farmland to begin with, meaning there was quite a bit of work to do before you could use it as such efficiently. I don't know if trees or other kinds of vegetation needed to be cut down, but I do know that large quantities of limestone needed to be removed. Plants don't grow on rocks very well, after all. You need soil for that. And you also can't plow a field with a ton of rocks on it, which you need to do in order to grow anything useful in large quantities. Bottom line, the rocks needed to go. So they were removed. But what to do with them? Well, you are looking at them. They were indeed used to build what you can see here. Houses, walls, and storage facilities, as well as stables and sheds. This type of construction is called dry stone construction, or, in case of a wall for example, a dry stone wall. Meaning the rocks were stacked on top of each other without the use of mortar or any other kind of substance to bind them together. The shape of the limestone in this area making this possible, but it still required great skill. Remember, the people who built this settlement were farmers, not craftsmen familiar with the construction of buildings, which is why dry stone construction is also referred to as architecture without an architect. Considering this, the farmers did remarkably well. This was only a seasonable settlement anyway, so there was no need for it to be particularly sophisticated. People lived here for as long as they needed to in order to get their work done before returning to their proper homes and families. But even knowing all this, there is a strange fascination to this place, entirely different from the one the Roman ruins we saw earlier have. For this is not only much more primal, it also feels much more real. You can easily imagine how the settlement was built and maintained, for it is quite obvious and very direct. Maybe you can even see yourself living here. It does leave a strong impression in any case. You can also see some of the tools that were in use back then. Once again, a factor that makes it easy for you to get an understanding of this place. It also eliminates any remaining doubt an especially skeptic visitor could have, remaining dedicated to the idea that this is somehow a Stone Age settlement, for, while many tools are made from wood only, there's also metal involved. Now, I have talked a lot about how real this place feels, but it can get even more real. For anyone interested, that is. For there's also a small area where you can build your own stone huts, if you want to. It's mostly intended as a children's playground, I suppose, but I can't imagine anyone trying to stop you if you feel like giving it a try as an adult. Anyway, since there also happens to be a panel on there, I'll read you the English section to provide some additional information. Bories are built with flat stones or slabs found on site. After destoning the land, which consists in removing the stones raised by plowing the fields, the builder has access to an abundant quantity of construction material. Once the first foundations have been laid, walls are raised using the false corbel arc principle. This means that each layer is built on the previous one with a slight overhang. The walls are still very thick, and the top of the roof is closed with large flat stones. This means of assembling stones does not require any formwork or centering. 50 tons of stones are needed to build a borie with a total area of 12 square meters and an internal surface area of 5 square meters. And with that we leave the village behind and move on to the next one. Now, what can I tell you about this one? First off, its name is Gordes. It was recommended to me by a friend. He is not a Frenchman though, but a citizen of the French-speaking part of Switzerland. He told me about it as a place I should definitely visit for its beauty, and it is supposed to be one of the most beautiful villages in France. Well, as I understand it, that is a title bestowed on many villages, meeting certain criteria, but it seems that they do not give it away easily. I for one was very glad I made the trip there, for it really is quite lovely. It's also fascinating. Just look at that balcony. It was built using one large chunk of rock. Not exactly the most common method of construction. And while the houses utilize mortar, most of the walls and some smaller structures do not, hinting at a relation to the village de Bories we just left. However, unfortunately, the first discovery I made in this beautiful place was a somewhat unpleasant one. Unpleasant, but important, which is why I'm sharing it with you now. I'm talking about this panel. It reads, "On the 22nd August 1944, the village of Gordes was shelled from this promontory. The German soldiers destroying several houses with mortars. Others were dynamited at the entrances to the village in order to prevent access. Most of the inhabitants fled. Those who remained protected themselves as well as they could, but a careless man, François Bruneau, was shot at his window by a German marksman waiting in ambush." As to why the Germans shelled this village, I can't tell you anything about that, for there is no reason given. I suspect resistance activity in the area to be the most likely reason. But it does not matter anyway, for this clearly was a military strike against a civilian target, which cannot be justified under any circumstances, and must therefore be seen as a war crime. From the very first moment I started my exploration of France, I was made painfully aware of the fact that Germany had committed terrible crimes against its neighbor. These reminders came in the form of memorials from both world wars, commemorating soldiers as well as resistance fighters, and signs like this one. I have never talked about it before, but I feel the need to do it now. For one, I have not talked about it before because I created this channel first and foremost to show you some of the beauty this world has to offer. True, I have visited a battlefield before, and more will follow eventually, but this is supposed to be the exception rather than the rule. For another, I don't want to repeat myself all the time for, as sad as it is, after 4 road trips to France and seeing quite a bit of the country, it is quite clear that there is hardly a place to find where Germans did not commit any crimes against the French people, which is, of course, most regrettable and shameful. The reason I am talking about this now is to make clear that I am very well aware of that fact and fully acknowledge it and anything it entails, and while I won't talk about it all the time, I will make sure to mention it every now and then. That being said, let me close by mentioning that, despite me being German and getting recognized as such on many occasions, I was never met with anything else but kindness. I was always treated well and with great courtesy, and I am grateful for the people of France for doing that. Alright, I hope I did not dampen your spirits. Time to get back to where we left, which would be Gordes. Look at that view, isn't it amazing? Time to explore this place in detail. First thing I did was to get all the way to the bottom of it. It's a little bit labyrinthine, but in a fun way. Just the right amount, if you ask me. For what is a road trip without anything to search for? Do you see that wall up there with a small one-man tower attached? Does it remind you of Belfort? If it does, you are spot on, for it is clearly part of the defenses of this place. Probably built within the same period, even if it is made from limestone as opposed to sandstone. Walking around this place kind of felt like being inside a fairy tale. At first I didn't see anyone and was mostly by myself. I guess most tourists don't approach the town from the lower area moving upwards, but I found it fascinating to see those walls and rock formations from this angle. There was hardly a spot where you could not find some remnant of an older structure long abandoned, so I had plenty to look at. Of course the view improved the higher I got. At this spot I felt I was at about the same altitude as my starting point. You can see the house with the one rock balcony right over there. The weather was pretty much perfect as well. I could have hardly asked for better conditions. Just look at that sky. The town proved just as much fun on the upper half as it had been before. See that wall down to the right? How about those cutouts in the rock above? Or that rounded arch close to the middle of the picture? Traces upon traces and traces. If these stones could talk, they would have quite the story to tell, I'm sure. Just a little higher, I was finally reaching the town proper, meaning a higher density of buildings, tiny uneven sidewalks and less green spaces. Fairly old buildings too. Like I used to say, you can tell a building is old when the electric wiring is stapled to the outside and rain gutters were installed as an afterthought. But it is a charming place to visit, that's for sure. No wonder it is popular with the tourists. Up here I started to see more of them too. I've had occasional run-ins before, but not to this degree. It still was very manageable though, even this late in the day, for it was only March and the main tourist season had not started yet. Looks like we are on the right track too. At least if you can trust the street name, that is. Just kidding. In fact, we are already there. It's the main church of Gordes. Judging by looks alone, it does not seem to be too old of a building. Neither Romanesque nor Gothic, but at the very most Renaissance instead. Although it could also be even later than that. In order to give you a better feeling for where we are, let me bring up one of the previous pictures again. The one offering the best overview of the town. There it is. And this is the church we are currently at. Now that we have established that, let's take a quick look inside. Yes, it does look quite Renaissance in here as well, and despite having suffered significant damage in some places, the paint job in its entirety is still largely there. Making this a variety of church I do not get to see at home. Which is, of course, exactly the point why I started this whole trip in the first place. With this church being along the smaller end of things, there was not much of a reason for me to stay that long. Meaning all that's left to do is to point out the statue of Jeanne d'Arc to you, and then leave. By the way, the small castle is directly next to the church. We have seen it before, of course, but only from a distance. Here are some shots from up close. Looking at it from the other side, I'm not sure if it even is a castle at all, for it might very well be a surviving part of the city wall. Of course it is also possible that both is the case, as these things are not mutually exclusive. Naturally, there's also a World War I memorial at the plaza on the other side. I refer you to what I said initially, before we entered the town. Going back to the castle, it contains a museum. However, I wasn't in the mood to visit, but preferred to look around the town instead. There were quite a number of gift shops around, with soap being one of the most common goods to be sold, and while there were many flavors available, lavender seems to be particularly popular, as it is most commonly associated with Provence itself. Of course I also enjoyed the view from up here, which was pretty amazing. But why tell you when I can show you? Here you go. I'll just leave that here for full 5 seconds. Knock yourselves out. Are you done? Great. Here are 2 more pictures I took on the way down again. You really can find something behind every corner at this place. Funny enough, the way back to Orange was an entirely different one than the one I took in. Of course I'd aimed for the village de Bories initially, which I suppose accounted for the different route. True, it is only a couple of kilometers away, but that can still result in a difference like that. It was no problem either way. The road was pretty slim at some points, but that aside the landscape was very beautiful, so I didn't mind at all. I have to say that it did look much better in real life though, as depth perception is the first thing to go on photographs. But I do have a short clip as well. Maybe that will help. This was the last picture I took that day. By then, the time was 16:44 hours, and I wasn't even back in Orange yet. But well on the way. It didn't matter too much anyway, since I did stay there for a second night, so there was no additional transition time to account for. So, by my standards, this was a somewhat lazy day. But that would change tomorrow. Drastically even. I hope you enjoyed Orange, and if you did, make sure to tune in for the next episode, when we will explore Avignon, one of the big names within the French city landscape. Have a nice day and take care.